India has been at the forefront of climate action, as many of our guests and dialogue partners have also pointed out. It is the only G20 nation that is well on track to meet its climate goals. India is also among the top 10 countries in the Climate Change Performance Index. As Prime Minister Narendra Modi put it, India is the only country delivering in letter and spirit the commitment to Paris Agreement. And spearheading this progress is India's Minister of Forest, Environment and Climate Change, Mr. Bhupender Yadav. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have him among us. Please welcome India's Minister for Environment, Forest and Climate Change and our guest of honor this evening, Mr. Bhupender Yadav.
He is India's Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. He is also India's Minister of Labour and Employment. Please welcome our guest of honor, Mr. Bhupender Yadav.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, greeting and namaste. Dear members of the August gathering, let me begin by thanking WION for inviting me to this global summit, whose theme is quite relevant in our contemporary times: climate calling, the last chance to answer climate emergency. Climate change is a global collective action problem and therefore require a global collective action solution. India firmly believes in multilateralism, and its climate policy is informed by its vision of inclusive growth, eradication of poverty, climate-friendly lifestyles, and firm adherence on UNFCCC fundamental principles. Those fundamental principles, basically foundational principle of UNFCCC, and they are the foundational principle of Paris Agreement also. India's vision of growth would continue to be inclusive, based on a foundation of Honorable Prime Minister mantra, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, or Sabka Prayas, with the backdrop of a deep-rooted cultural tradition of reverence for nature. The two IPCC reports from August 2021 and the recent report which we received in February 2022 are a wake-up call to the world. The first report tells us that the world's carbon budget is rapidly being exhausted. If we are to keep to the target of 1.5 degree centigrade of temperature increase, only 500 gigaton of carbon dioxide emission is still possible. Adaptation to climate change is a universal requirement. It is constantly knocking at our door. It is an unwelcome parcel sent by the developed countries to the rest of the world in a warming globe. Climate change is about the increasing reluctance of the developed countries to mitigate their GHG emission, thereby thrusting adaptation need on the developing countries. Our people who have contributed only minimally to GHG emission will face the unprecedented burden of adaptation as well. Burden of adaptation is increasing and will rise even further without urgent action by the developed countries. The second IPCC report makes it clear that the risk of inaction are steadily mounting sustained effort, as development can still enable adaptation for 1.5 degree warming, but in some sector, adaptation is reaching its limit. Developed countries are continuing their high consumption, lifestyle, and highly inadequate mitigation. In the next 10 years alone, their cumulative emission will be far more than the fair share of cumulative emission that they are allowed until net zero. Who is responsible for this crisis? 60% of global cumulative emission thus far have been more the developed countries, even though they account only for 17% of the global population, and their profligate lifestyle and inadequate climate mitigation continues. In the decade of 2020 to 2030, even according to their revised indices, the developed countries will emit 141 gigaton of carbon dioxide. This is more than 1.6 times of their fair share of the remaining carbon budget for 1.5 degree warming up to the net zero of in 2050. India, in contrast, has contributed around 4% of the global cumulative emission so far, with more than 17% of the global population. Developing countries face a double challenge. The remaining carbon budget is a small but decoupling growth from the emission is now challenged, but historically no developed country has faced. Our people cannot wait for cheaper batteries and storage of realize improvement of their life. Even to expand renewable energy, you need the backup of fossil fuel. Since then, the sun does not shine throughout, and the day, nor does the wind blow all the time. For India, the backup is coal. In developed countries, it is oil, gas, and coal in several key industrial sectors. Green alternatives are still to see the light of the day. India speaks with hope and optimism based on its commitment and action. India will be part of the solution to the climate crisis, and its policies will be based on the equity and climate justice. But the world can still face the challenge of climate change if we act resolutely and with the spirit of cooperation. The Honorable Prime Minister, in his Panchamrit announcement at Glasgow, has shown that India is doing more than its fair share of mitigation and moving ahead of the path of low carbon development. We want the developed countries to meet the promise of $100 billion of the climate finance annually by next year. But this must be through public finance that is mainly in grants and not private sector loan. Developed countries must be inspired and transparent about the extent of fund they have mobilized, as they have been lagging so much on this COP26, passed an unprecedented resolution of regret at the failure of achieve this objective. In any case, the figure of 100 billion annually that was promised at Copenhagen in 2009 is now highly insufficient. As Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi called out at COP26, two, meaningful now. The climate finance target must be $1 trillion annually in view of the expectations under the Paris Agreement. Developed countries must use current development as an opportunity to lower their dependence on oil, gas, and coal and rapidly increase renewable. This must give up the path of mindless and destructive consumption, they must come to COP27 with a new spirit of multilateralism and international cooperation. We urge the developed countries to adopt the mantra of life, which is given our Prime Minister. The mantra of life means lifestyle for the environment and path of mindful and deliberate utilization and not mindless and destructive consumption. With hope, they will come to COP27 with a new spirit of cooperation without pointing finger at the large developing countries. In the spirit of multilateralism and international cooperation, let us work together to secure the future of humanity and this planet. With resolute domestic and international action, India speaks on climate change with a position of strength and responsibility. In key sector of economy, the mitigation effort have been undertaken with a vision of low carbon, sustainable development. India has progressively continued decoupling of economic growth from the greenhouse gas emission. India's emission intensity of gross domestic product has reduced by 24% between 2005 and 2016. Further, India has also overreached one of its nationally determined contribution NDCs announced at Paris Summit 2015 by already meeting 40% of its power capacity from non-fossil fuels as of November 2021, almost 9 years ahead of the commitment. The forests of India are teeming with wildlife. They support 70% of the global tiger population, more than 60% of Asian elephant, 80% of rhinos, and 100% of Asiatic lion population, making the India one of the 17th mega biodiversity country in the world. I would like to conclude by saying, and that is a motto of our ministry, the Sanskrit word is Prakriti Rakshitaha Rakshitaha. That means nature protects if she is protected. And so we must do all it takes to protect nature, because there is no doubt that this is our last chance to address the climate emergency. Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your valuable perspective and for highlighting some very significant points, how adaptation is reaching its limit, how cumulative emissions of developed countries are 60%, even though their population is only 17% of the global population, India's contribution to climate action and setting the agenda, as it were, for COP26. This gives us all food for thought. Thank you very much again.